I'd like for everyone to think for a moment about the value of human life. And does one person's life have any more value than another person's life? The current fee-for-service system, healthcare is rationed out based on the patient's ability to pay. I believe it's unethical. This is criminal. 95% of the country is still functioning in the fee-for-service model. I definitely believe everyone should be treated the same.
Everyone should have access to primary care regardless of their ability to pay.
Hi, I'm Dr. Faisel Syed. Welcome to another episode of Faisel Friends. We're here because we believe everyone deserves access to quality primary care, and ChenMed needs physicians to take care of them. Today's topic is happy doctors equal healthy patients. I'm very excited about our special friend joining us tonight. But before, Dr. Dan, our moderator for the evening. How are you doing, Dan?
Good. It's great to be with you. Looking forward to it. Looking forward to taking comments and questions this evening.
Fabulous. And tonight, with the questions and comments, we're gonna try our best to answer them at the end of the show, because we've got some questions for our guest, and I really want to get through those questions.
Absolutely.
Well, without any further ado, I'm so excited to welcome tonight's guest. He is one of modern healthcare's 50 most influential physician leaders, the former executive director and CEO of the Permanente Medical Group, professor at the Stanford Medical School and Stanford Graduate School of Business, and a visiting professor at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, Haas School of Business, and Harvard School of Public Health. He's also ChenMed's favorite author. His book, Mistreated: Why We Think We're Getting Good Healthcare and Why We're Usually Wrong, is required reading for ChenMed physician leaders. We're also anxiously awaiting his next book, Uncaring: How the Culture of Medicine Kills Doctors and Patients. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Robert Pearl. Hi, Robbie. How are you doing?
Great, Faisel. It's great to see you and looking forward to the show tonight.
We are so thrilled to have you here, and let's get started right away. So, as one of the top 50 most influential physician leaders in healthcare, what do you see as the number one issue in healthcare that needs influencing today?
The number one issue, without question, Faisel, is cost. Now, we've talked about cost for decades. We've said we should change, we must change. I want to make the point that in the post-coronavirus era, we will change. Now, during the past year, some companies like Amazon and Apple, Netflix have done well as we try to deal with our isolation, being at home. But most of the country has suffered financially, by the way, including a lot of physicians. What we know is that the United States, by the time it's all done, will have borrowed between $8 and $10 trillion. That will need to be repaid with interest. We also know that the states, by law, have to have a balanced budget. And the tax revenue is projected in almost all of them to be significantly reduced. And the expectations around unemployment and Medicaid will go up. And businesses, the ones that still exist, a third of them say they can't survive without continued government payments. We are about to enter in the post-coronavirus era, a difficult financial time. Now, what I believe is that people will look at the numbers. We spend $11,000 per American, Switzerland at 9, Germany at 7. Everyone else spends half of what we spend. And yet we know the outcomes across the United States: longevity, childhood mortality, maternal mortality, lag the other 12 nations. They're going to look to healthcare and expect that we become much more efficient and effective. What we know is that it's impossible to guarantee reduced costs in a fee-for-service world. Doctors and hospitals often simply increase volume as the price they're paid declines. Our nation will face, I believe, two choices. First choice, rationing. Rationing is done in a lot of nations. You set an upper limit when you can have heart surgery or total joint replacement. Rationing happens because you create long queues for consultation and routine procedures, and you keep expensive medications off of the formulary. Or our nation will decide to transform how healthcare is provided, moving from a fee-for-service world to a global type payment, capitation, technically its term. And in doing that, it's going to change how physicians practice. They're going to have to come up with ways of being able to take care of populations of patients in a better way, higher quality, more convenient, rapid access, lower cost. I think that will challenge us, but I also believe, and I'm sure we'll talk about it a lot more tonight, that in doing that and putting the patient at the front, we'll have the opportunity to restore purpose and mission. I think some doctors will step forward, and once they do so, that others will follow them in the same way that when Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile, people thought it was impossible. And within 3 years, 10 other runners had done that. That's my hope. And I believe that ChenMed will be one of the organizations leading the way.
Thank you. Thank you. Many people find it difficult to hear about physicians struggling in the current system. And to know that we have this option, we have ChenMed, a physician-led organization, scaling out the full risk model across the country is quite promising to any of the doctors who are suffering in the current fee-for-service model. So now, thank you. So now you've worn many hats in your career. You've been a doctor, a business leader, an author, educator. What's the one thing that you learned as CEO of Kaiser Permanente that you wish to pass on to healthcare leaders listening right now?
When I became the CEO, Kaiser Permanente was an organization, but was struggling. The quality was not yet nation leading. The service was somewhat lagging. And I believe that the thing we had to do was to improve in both areas. And the advice that I'd give to people in the 21st century is look to technology. And I don't mean the technology that's been used to simply drive up volume, the robotic surgery and the proton beam accelerators that have been shown to add very little value. I want to be much more specific, and I'll use 3 examples from the work that I did as CEO. The first one, in partnership with the health plan leader, was to make the billion-dollar investment in a high-functioning electronic health record. And the reason we did that was a belief that we could increase quality. When every physician has comprehensive information, when not just primary care, but every doctor can look at things like hypertension and be able to communicate, not necessarily treat it, but recognize it. I mean, we learned that the first week of medical school. That sits there. You know, of course, the United States today, Faisel, hypertension is controlled 55% of the time. We controlled it 90% of the time. We lowered the mortality from heart disease in half of the national number because at every point of contact could do the things that were needed in terms of prevention, early detection, and you can't do those things without an electronic health record. So anyone out there who is working without one, and I mean an EHR because everyone has one, but one that's comprehensive, needs to figure out what they can do next. The second thing we did was to connect primary care and specialty care using a combination of video and digital technology. It meant that when the patient came in to see the primary care physician, and the primary care physician felt that he or she needed to have a specialty consultation, before the patient left, we brought the two groups together to bring in that expertise. Something, by the way, we also did out at some of the businesses that we served, like Apple. In doing that, dermatology is a great example. 70% of the rashes that primary care wanted a specialty consultation, not the ones that they took care of themselves, got taken care of in a matter of 6 minutes. I don't know what it's like in the communities that you serve. Most of the nation waits 6 days, 6 weeks, or even 6 months to get access there. And then finally, using the same telemedicine and texting and secure email, the ability to provide care to patients without forcing them to miss a day of work, come to the office, etc. By the time I left as CEO in 2017, we were seeing 16 million people in person and 14 million virtual visits, many of which were able to resolve the problem in a way that led to sooner care, higher quality care, greater patient satisfaction.
Wow. It's very similar to the world that we're in. And I think about while we're in training, when I needed to curbside someone, I didn't have to take the patient and move the patient from one part of the hospital to the other part of the hospital just to get the opinion of the specialist. Many times in the hospital world, we were able to curbside and get the advice that we needed in order to take care of the patient. And these days, with all the technology that we have available to us, it's ridiculous. And especially when you're talking about a vulnerable patient population, having them come to the center just to see a specialist for a few minute visit when it could have been easily handled by the primary care doctor. Well, Dr. Pearl, no conversation would be complete without talking about your book, Mistreated. I was touched that you dedicated the book to your father. And when I read the book, I was struck by how you articulated the costly, often unnecessary healthcare decisions that don't lead to better health. How do we help Americans who are often intimidated by doctors and the system to make better healthcare decisions when the entire system itself is often stacked up against them?
What you're describing is a very big problem. And I would say not just for patients, but for doctors. And so, although I'll be speaking about a lot of other aspects tonight, I do want to make the point that the system is broken. And when we talk about physician burnout, which hopefully we'll cover later on, we're talking about the fact that physicians often are not paid enough and have to see too many patients. We're talking about bureaucratic tasks that take a lot of their time and energy. We're talking about a broken EHR that's very inefficient. But I think we also need to talk about the other aspects. And as physicians, we need to own them. So the book, as you say, is about a medical error that led to the demise of my father. What's remarkable to me is when I speak at conferences, we used to have actually conferences. We don't have anymore. We have video and Zoom chat now. But at the end of the time, I'd come off the stage and there'd be a line of people, and 3/4 of them told me the same story about how their mother or their father or their spouse or their kid died from a consequence of a medical error. And we can do better at being able to adjust that. And the fact that my father had one when both myself and my brother's the chairman of anesthesia at Stanford, we're there to help him, tells me it can happen to everyone. But I do want to stress that there are a lot of books out there saying you got to go to the hospital and protect your parent. Now, this has to be a mutual, respectful relationship. And I think what I would say to the people who are not in healthcare but are listening in anyway is that you can't be hesitant to have that open, honest conversation. The kind of patriarchal relationship has to be left in the past. We have to be informed consumers. In Uncaring, I have a whole chapter on the questions that patients should ask. I'll give you 3 examples. In the short term, you see a patient for a problem. There needs to be some kind of follow-up, but it's not going to require any kind of intervention. The questions have to be, how can I get back to you most easily? Can I text you? Can I email you? Can we set up a video appointment? Why should I have to come back in to tell you that I'm doing well? I understand it's an important piece of data for you to have, but is there a more efficient way we can do that? And that's with the kinds of things that are, I'll call them more routine, urgent but not emergent. The second area where patients need to be asking the right questions is when they need to have some kind of intervention, a procedure done. And in that area, the kinds of questions to ask is, how many of these did you do last year? If you were the patient, how many would you insist your physician do before you would agree to doing that? You know, when we give informed consent, we have 55 items on the list. I want to know what's most significant. Is it an 80% chance or a 20% chance? These are the kinds of questions. You know, I talk in the book about OBGYN, and the operation that is done a lot is a laparoscopic hysterectomy. If I asked you what's the average number of procedures a OBGYN physician does in the United States today, this operation, how many times a year? And I told you half of the physicians do fewer than 10. I don't think that you would recommend that. Patients don't know. And so it's that kind of question that needs to get asked. And then finally, we have people who are, I'll call them, near the end of life with heart failure, multiple admissions, pulmonary failure, multiple admissions. When you're in that situation, a very advanced cancer, the first question to ask is, what other options exist? What else could I do? What about hospice? What are the other services that could be provided? And then I think maybe the most important question, if I decide I don't want any more treatment, will you be there for me? Or will I be left alone? So the book has those kinds of questions. And I would say to all the people listening in who are not in the healthcare field, the most respectful thing you can do is to engage with your doctor on these crucial areas and together to come up with a plan that is going to be satisfying. And I believe will be even more satisfying for the physicians, again, as it touches back into mission and purpose.
Wow. The doctors and the patients working together to find that common goal of improving the patient's health. Well, Dr. Pearl, thank you so much for answering these first couple questions. I loved your answers. But at this point now, we'd like to take a little break to air a commercial from our sponsor, ChenMed. And stay tuned, because following the commercial, we're going to be getting into Dr. Robbie Pearl's new book, Uncaring: How the Culture of Medicine Kills Doctors and Patients. We'll see you right back.
ChenMed honors seniors with affordable, top-of-the-line care, and we're expanding. We're opening 25 new centers this year, including centers in 2 new cities, Houston and Detroit. Join us as we bring better healthcare to more seniors. Head to chenmed.com/physicians for more information.
Okay, and we're back. This is a new thing with having a commercial put in the middle of the show. Usually it's right at the end where we'll say that this episode is brought to you by ChenMed. Robert, good to see you. Thank you for joining. Robert is our co-host. And Robert, so we just asked Dr. Pearl a couple questions about his background, his history, his advice to young physician leaders. And right now we're just about to get into his new book, Uncaring: How the Culture of Medicine Kills Both Doctors and Patients. So Dr. Pearl, with your new book, Uncaring, that's coming out on May 19th, you dedicated this book to your mother. I was touched by that. What's the book about?
The book is about the physician culture. And for listeners who may not be very familiar with what that means, culture is the beliefs, it's the values, it's the norms, the stories, it's the language that we learn in medical school and residency and carry across our career. I picked the word uncaring for the title because I think it's important, 2 things. First, I'm not saying in any way doctors aren't caring. They're very caring. They're very dedicated. They're very hardworking. What's not caring is the culture. And the second is that uncaring doesn't mean it's good or bad. It means that it's all situational. I'll give you a few examples. When the coronavirus came ashore, hospitals were overwhelmed. Critical care units were overwhelmed. Physicians went there 12-hour shifts, 24-hour shifts. When they didn't have the protective gowns that they should have had, they put on garbage bags. When they didn't have N95 masks, they put on salad lids. When they had to pass a tube through someone's mouth into their lung, they knew that every time the tube went through the cords, the patient would cough, spewing virus in their face, and they did it anyway. The culture gave them the courage, and when they ran out of respirators, they figured out how they could put two people on the same respirator, something that had never been done before, never contemplated before. The physician culture made doctors into heroes. But I wrote the book, as I mentioned to you earlier. In the book, I talk about the love between my parents. My father saw my mom as perfect. My mom saw my dad as, she loved him just as much, but she could see the flaws. And by pointing out the flaws, I think that maybe it made things a little bit better. And that's what I was hoping to do with this book. And I believe that a lot of physician burnout, and I want to be clear, physician burnout definitely comes from the system. The system is very problematic, and much more so now. But I'd ask people to be asking themselves, do we really believe that in no way as doctors do we contribute? Do we really believe that having yelled about this for 5 years and nothing has changed, that we need to just scream louder? So this research that led to this book, Uncaring, How the Culture of Medicine Kills Doctors and Patients, came out of a desire to understand that. And one thing that I found, was we tell ourselves things through the culture that allow us to do some of the things we'd like to do, but may not be what's in the best interest of patients. And I believe that as a consequence of that, the culture works like a fine-grained sieve, and some of the emotion comes forward. So I'll give you a few examples. We tell ourselves we save a life at any cost, and we did that when we intubated patients and took care of them.
Absolutely.
But what else do we know? We know that 88% of people who died had 2 or more chronic diseases. And we don't do very well at taking care of chronic disease. It's not that we couldn't, as I pointed out earlier. Integrated multi-specialty groups are capable of changing hypertension from 55 to 90+%, capable of screening for colon cancer at over 90% rather than 60%. We can do it. The culture just says it's not very important. We elevate intervention. We elevate the invasive cardiologist, the interventional cardiologist, above primary care. Now, what does the data say? The data says that primary care, add 10 physicians in primary care to a community, and you increase longevity 2.5 times more than adding similar number of specialists. And yet, we put the specialist in the hierarchy of medicine that we control. No one makes us do it. Above the primary care physician, you'd expect that it would be the opposite. But that whole process of elevating intervention over prevention. What else did we see? We tell ourselves we treat every patient the same. Do we really? The data says that when a black patient and a white patient walked into the ED early in the pandemic, when there was not enough testing kits, exact same symptoms, exact same fever, exact same problems, we tested the white patient twice as often as the black patient.
My goodness.
You know, what else do we know? We know that women, black women, have 3 times the mortality of white women, except when the attending physician is black. Remarkable statistics. We know that when we had 2 patients at the same operation, we give 40% less pain medication to the black patient. We as physicians have to, I believe, own that. And I believe in doing so that we will diminish our burnout and improve our sense of purpose and mission. And I'll be even more controversial. which is that we tell ourselves that we always put the patient first. But then how do we explain out-of-network billing when the patient got caught in the middle between our battle with the insurance company? How do we justify the fact that doctors actually sue patients who can't pay? It's usually not done by the doctor. It's done by some administrative group that runs the practice, but it's for the things that we do. How do we explain that 30% of the procedures that we've done, according to the Mayo Clinic, add no value, and we keep doing them? You know, the most commonly done operation in orthopedics is an arthroscopy with cartilage trimming. That's been shown by studies from Canada and the United States multiple times to add no value, and we still don't do that. An opportunity, I think, to improve patient care will not only benefit the people who trust their lives in our hands, but I think our profession and us individually as well. That's what the book focuses on.
Many people outside of the healthcare system aren't familiar with the concept of doctors practicing this defensive form of medicine. And that's one of the points you're talking about here. It's very provocative. You're basically saying that the current healthcare system culture is literally killing doctors and patients. If you can please share with the doctors and the healthcare leaders who are listening right now, your top 3 survival tips until we can change this culture.
I'm not sure I'd put it in terms of 3 survival tips per se, because I think the 2 things that have to change together is the system and the culture. And it's that combination that I think that'll make the difference. And I hadn't seen the video from the start of this show before I watched it tonight with everyone else. But many of the things I talk about in the book and believe in are embedded within that. The first thing is moving from fee-for-service to some form of capitated payment. And as part of that, once physicians take that accountability, what I believe happens next is that they figure out very quickly they can't make the change happen without integrating, without bringing together a bunch of physicians and sharing technology among them. But I also would tell the listeners that when that happens, the culture starts to evolve, because suddenly it's in your interest to elevate prevention, avoid complication from chronic disease, eliminate any type of medical error. You elevate primary care when you do that, because the contributions become far more visible, because now we're measuring clinical outcomes, improvement in life expectancy, reducing the chance of dying prematurely. And when you start to do that, you realize that how technology can add value, whether it's having information on quality outcomes at every point of contact, whether it's being able to have telemedicine to provide care sooner, leading to better outcomes, avoiding negative things happening in the consequence. You start to recognize that what's done in most of the United States, which is we close the office at 5 o'clock and have it closed at least for one day on the weekend, puts patients in a situation where they have no choice but to go to an emergency department. And anyone who thinks that we can give the same quality of care when you're seeing a physician for the first time, whose main job is to figure out whether to admit you or not, is not accurate. We do it because no one doctor can keep an office open. It's not that one doctor should, but a group of doctors can. And you can bring in expertise from anywhere in the country where it's as optimal as it can. And I want to add one other part that I truly believe and really forms the basis of the program. And I think it aligns a lot with ChenMed has done, particularly yourself and Chris and Gordon Chen. And that is that it restores mission and purpose. Every one of us went into healthcare to save lives, to make a difference in people's lives. If we wanted to make a lot of money, we would have gone into finance or someplace else.
That's right.
We did it for all the right reasons. I've done quite a number of global trips, led them. People come back after a week of working 12-hour days in the heat with problems with their diet and their GI tract and everything else, and it's the greatest experience of their life. Together, we have to put that back into medicine, and I don't know anyone who can lead it as well as the physicians. Hopefully those on the line will join you and me going forward, and I think if we do so, we can make American medicine, once again, the greatest in the world.
Oh. Thank you, Dr. Pearl. Thank you, Dr. Pearl.
So, Dr. Pearl, I have a question for you.
Sure, Robert.
Hey, everybody. Sorry I was a little bit late, but Dr. Pearl, let me ask you this. So medical education is a big driver of the future of the healthcare industry. How do you transform the ways that we train physicians in medical school to reflect these values that are largely kind of system-based concepts? So how do you actually ingrain this people from an earlier age rather than waiting for them to kind of get out and have to be like burned by the insurance system and fee-for-service to actually get out there and say, I'm going to advocate for my patient?
I don't think it's actually that hard to change the system. I think the people who run the system don't really want to change the system. They're happy to be training a lot of specialists because in the training process, they earn a lot of money. They're less happy to train primary care physicians. Why is that? It's not economically beneficial for their organizations that are out there. They could easily train people on how to come together in an integrated fashion, to prioritize prevention, to use telemedicine, but that would diminish their income and billing. I think the problem is intrinsic in the culture. And remember, every culture is passed on from the generation before. And so having the culture shift going forward, that's the challenge. It's a very difficult thing to do. That's why it hasn't happened yet. But again, I'm optimistic that when physicians look at this choice between rationing care and transforming medicine, that they will step forward. They'll go through the 5 stages of Kubler-Ross. There's denial probably going on or has been, anger when you're forced to do it, bargaining to keep the pieces that are going to be there, depression, but ultimately it's going to be acceptance. And acceptance, I'm hoping, will also mean seeing it as being better for patients and better for themselves. The other piece that I would say, and I wrote a piece for this for the New England Journal of Medicine, was that I believe in the 4th year of medical school. Now remember, the 4th year of medical school used to be when you traveled around the United States, and now no one travels anywhere. They do it all on Zoom. Why not have every medical student spend a month in business school, learning how to create groups, learning how to do financial analysis, learning how to do the skills. I teach both the medical school and the business school. And there's 2 sets of skills, but they're very complementary. The way business leaders think is the scientific method that we learn in medicine. We never put the 2 pieces together. So that's what I would hope. We change the curriculum and we force the institutions to do that. They're slowly evolving, but I think it's a very slow evolution.
I think I fully agree with you. So I studied healthcare management and policy, and we learn a little bit of medicine and a whole bunch of business and policy, which drive a lot of the behavior of the system in the United States. And, I think there's certainly a place for a lot of physicians in the world to be able to also learn a little bit more about the finance and the business of healthcare, because at the end of the day, when you graduate medical school, you graduate residency, you end up in the world of business in the private healthcare system of the United States. So I think that's an excellent point. I might also add that, a little bit of technology education. The world is going more data-driven. It's becoming more reliant on digital technologies, on electronic medical records, and physicians that can speak that language will be a powerful tool for changing patient care.
I'm less concerned about that because I think most of the people on this line who are in medical school or in residency, they're pretty good with the technology that exists. I think they could use it very easily. How to build it into the system is a different question, but I think I'm less concerned about them having to learn it. I'd like them to figure out in a business environment how to apply it and then be able to do that and to lead the way going forward.
Dr. Pearl, thank you so much.
You definitely need the business case to make it viable.
Well, one other thing, if I could add on that, is that we think about leadership training the way we think about receipts and expenses in a given year. We should think about it the same way we think about capital. It's a 30-year investment. I know that people in ChenMed do a lot of investing in leadership development, and it's not designed to pay back in 1 year. It's designed to pay back in 2-3 decades of time. You know, when I was the CEO in the Permanente Medical Group, I led 12,000 physicians, and over 25% of them had at least a month of leadership training. A massive investment that I think was why so many improvements happened. You know, we did a lot of really innovative things, and I'd like to say I took almost no credit for thinking about them. Someone else figured it out. Someone else figured out how to do 60% of our orthopedics total joints as outpatients. Someone else figured out how to take care of pneumonia in a patient's home. Someone else figured out the referral system so that rather than sending a piece of paper that someone got in the mail, the patient had to call, it was done electronically before the patient left the doctor's office. I found those things as CEO. But without the leadership training, without that mindset and the thinking, it never could happen. And again, I know, and congratulations to you and to the two of you and to Gordon and Chris. I think that's very much endemic in the culture of ChenMed, that kind of innovative leadership in a broadest sense.
Doctors must be savvy. The transition from the fee-for-service system must be physician-led, and the days of doctors kind of putting their hands up and trusting an administrator to figure it out, those days are gone. And anyone who still believes that is going to be left behind. Well, Dr. Dan, I'm sure that you have at least one question that we could bring in and to Dr. Pearl from the audience tonight.
Yeah, absolutely, Faisel. And so Robbie, Mary Beard has a question that I think is good. It sort of reminds me of the way Don Berwick will close a conference. He'll talk about these grand ideas, but then he'll say, think big, but start small. So she's asking, she works with FQHC, and what could she bring back to encourage them during these trying times? So for the people that are sort of stuck, at least in a mostly fee-for-service world, what kind of optimism can you give those doctors to refocus on or look into as they move forward next week?
Well, FQHC often actually has a prepaid variant, so she might be in one that's not. In California, a lot of the patients in Medicaid were in a prepaid form. So I think it's a very good way to go. There are two things that I would say. One, I remember a conference I ran several years ago when I gave a very impassioned speech from the standpoint of disease prevention and chronic disease management. And the next speaker was from the community clinic. And she said when she asked the patients there, their highest priority, nothing that I said was on the list. Wow. They worried about housing, heat, food, transportation, having a job. Yeah. These were the things in their mind that were health. And so we have to be very aware of that. Mary's obviously very aware of it. She takes care of it every single day. But for the other listeners that are there, the thing that I would suggest to her is two things. First, what can she do with the resources that she has to leverage the technology that exists? Again, I'm sure she's thought about that, but smartphones are relatively ubiquitous, and finding actually tools that we can give to patients, because her patients are going to have the greatest problem coming to our offices and getting the care and needing the reminders of care that are there. And we can do that very easily using some type of digital technology. But what I also might suggest, and I'm encouraging people everywhere in the United States to ask the broader question, how do we put together some kind of integrated function if we can't build facilities and do the kinds of things that groups like Kaiser Permanente or ChenMed might have already been done? How do we use telemedicine so that providers in one area are able to provide care to patients in another? Because we know that demand is up in some areas and down in other areas. I can tell you that in the community clinics, getting specialty access is almost impossible. But how do we find one or two orthopedic surgeons, cardiologists willing to be available to provide the expertise. My observation is that much of the time when primary care sends a patient to a specialist, they need a small piece of information. They don't need a total evaluation. They're not quite sure about a medication or a treatment. And how do we leverage that in a way, again, dermatology being a great example of that, where a dermatologist using digital pictures can take care of twice as many people as they can in person. And I'll give you one other example, which this came out of, I was also the CEO on the East Coast as well as the West Coast, and the Mid-Atlantic region put an ED doc available into the call center at night using telemedicine. And 70% of people who otherwise would have come to the ED were able to get their problems solved at home. Imagine the mother or the father who has both school for the other kids and work the next day, and having to decide at 2 a.m. whether the 103 fever requires bringing the child to the ED, where you know there's going to be a 3 or 4 hour wait. Those are the kinds of thinking when you start to ask, what can I do? And again, I'm sure Mary's asking that all the time. But as we ask that across all of the venues in which we practice, I believe we're going to come up with ways that we otherwise might not have thought about. That's going to change the experience, first for the patient, and I think for us to give us a greater sense of satisfaction. The last thing we want as doctors is to feel like we're letting our patients down. And the opportunity to offer them something they never thought was even possible, I think will not only meet their needs, but fill us with a greater sense of mission and purpose. I welcome the thoughts of all. If people have ideas, send them to me. I'd like to learn from your expertise so I can tell other groups about it across the nation. Again, I think that together we can change American healthcare. We can once again make it the best in the world.
Gosh, Dr. Robbie Pearl, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
My pleasure, Faisel. And thank you so much for hosting it. Thank you, Robert, and Dan, for your questions as well.
And to anyone who's listening tonight, Dr. Pearl, if you wouldn't mind sharing them, you've got a special announcement about going to the website with pre-ordering your book.
Sure. Anyone who pre-orders Uncaring, How the Culture of Medicine Kills Doctors and Patients will receive, in addition to the book, they'll be delivered to their house on May 18th when it's published. They'll get a signed book plate from me, a discussion guide if you want to use it in a discussion group, a book reading list, and you'll get to see the introduction to the book before anyone else in the United States does. So if you'd like to do that, please do. And if you want more information, my website is robertpearlmd.com, where you can get a lot more information just on the broad area of healthcare. And once again, thank you so much for hosting this. I'm hoping that be a major, major force to moving our nation forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Burrow. And Dr. Dan, thank you so much for manning the chat room. I saw there was a lot of activity there. It'll be interesting to go through that later on. Afterwards, I actually do read through all the comments, and I try to reply to as many of them as possible. Robert, thank you so much for joining tonight. It's always great to have you.
Yes, I apologize for being late. I was at a dinner with an AARP-related organization, so I was a little late. I tried to make it, but Dr. Pearl, thank you very much for joining us and enlightening us with all of your insights in the healthcare system.
And to all of our audience, thank you too for joining. For more information about today's topic and to explore career opportunities with ChenMed, please visit ChenMed.com. We believe access to primary care is a right, not a privilege.